So today we're jumping right into the messy, complicated, and frankly chaotic birth of a nation, Chile. And you can forget any simple story of heroes and villains. You see, the air across the Americas was already buzzing with these revolutionary ideas from the United States and France, but for Chile, the road to independence wasn't some straight shot. No, it was this tangled mess of ambition, betrayal, and really strange alliances, all kicked off by the collapse of an entire world order. To even begin to understand the revolution, we have to first get a feel for the world it completely shattered.
In the Spanish colonies, the king wasn't just some guy in charge. He was, as this source puts it, a true idol. Think about that. A kind of semi-divine figure whose authority was the very glue holding society together across two entire oceans. This wasn't just political loyalty. It was a deep, almost religious belief.
All right, so let's dig into the pillars of this colonial world. It was basically built on two unshakable foundations. First, the divine authority of the king, and second, a social structure that was as rigid as you can possibly imagine.
Okay, so this social pyramid, it defined everything. At the very top, you had the peninsulares. These are people born in Spain, and they held all the real power. There were the viceroys, the governors, the bishops. Right below them, you've got the criollos. Now, these are people of pure Spanish blood, but they were born in the Americas. They could be super wealthy, own tons of land, be really well educated, but they were completely shut out from the top jobs of governing their own land. And that created this deep, simmering resentment that was just waiting to boil over.
So the main idea here, the linchpin of it all, was the king's power. It wasn't just political. It was a divine right. To question the king meant you were questioning God, the social order, your entire place in the universe. And yet, for those educated criollos, these new republican ideas spreading from North America and France, well, they offered this incredibly tempting alternative. A world ruled not by divine right, but by the people themselves.
That absolute divine authority, it was about to be broken. And the crisis didn't start in Chile, or with some bold declaration of independence. No, it started thousands of miles away, with one man, Napoleon Bonaparte.
In 1808, Napoleon's armies just storm right into Spain. He captures their king, Ferdinand VII, and forces him to give up the throne. And just like that, the idol, the divine ruler, is sitting in a French prison. The center of the entire Spanish universe has vanished. As this news slowly trickles across the Atlantic, it creates this massive, unbelievable power vacuum.
And this quote from a popular pamphlet at the time just says it all. You've got two doormen talking, and one basically asks, wait a minute, if the king didn't appoint our leaders, are they just floating? I mean, what a question. It perfectly captures the crisis. If the king is gone, who's actually in charge? The entire system was just as they said, in the air.
So how did the local elite, those frustrated criollos, react to all this chaos? Well, not with some radical cry for independence. Not at all. It was actually a deeply conservative move, really just designed to keep the lights on until the king, hopefully, came back.
A huge debate just erupts in Santiago. On one side, you have the criollo-led town council, the Cabildo. They're fired up by these new Republican ideals, and they argue that since the king is gone, power returns to the people. That gives them the right to form a local government, or junta. But on the other side, you've got the peninsulares in the royal court, the audiencia. They see any local government as a huge step towards rebellion, and they demand total loyalty to these temporary councils that were set up back in Spain.
It all came to a head on September 18, 1810. The criollos managed to force this big open town meeting, and they successfully voted to create Chile's very first governing junta. And this is so important, they immediately swore an oath of loyalty to the captive King Ferdinand. See, this wasn't a declaration of independence. It was just a caretaker government, a temporary thing, or so they claim.
But once you take the king's authority out of the equation, even for a little while, well, the genie is out of the bottle. Personal ambition, ideology, it all just exploded. And the so-called patriot movement pretty much immediately started tearing itself apart with these incredibly bitter rivalries.
And the raw emotion you find in the historical record is just startling. This is from the diary of José Miguel Carrera, one of the main early leaders.
He's talking about how bad a rival general is, and he says that in a serious situation, a leader that bad would have been put on the block. He means executed. This wasn't some polite political disagreement. This was visceral, it was personal, and it was deadly serious.
And then you get this. Talk about contrast. We go from Carrera's fiery, angry diary entry to the super formal, professional, military language of his great rival, Bernardo O'Higgins. I put all this to Your Excellency's notice. The clash here wasn't just about strategy. It was about personality, about style, and about who really was destined to lead this new Chile. So here's the big takeaway. The first phase of this independence struggle, it wasn't just a war against Spain, it was basically a civil war among the patriots themselves. They were fighting each other for control of the revolution, with these factions forming around powerful, charismatic, and deeply, deeply divided leaders like Carrera and O'Higgins.
But if you can believe it, the conflict was even more complicated than that. There was another major player in this war, one with centuries of history in the region, the indigenous Araucano people, who you might also know as the Mapuche.
So you'd assume, right, you've got the patriots on one side, the Spanish royalists on the other. Simple. But what if I told you that one of the most powerful fighting forces in all of Chile decided to ally themselves with a king? The real question is, why?
Well, from the Araucano point of view, the brutal truth was that their direct enemies were not some abstract king thousands of miles away in Spain. No, their enemies were the local Criollo landowners, the exact same men who were now leading this patriot cause. It was the Criollos who had taken their land, who enforced the brutal systems of oppression, and who hunted them.
And so you get this twist that just shatters any simple good guy, bad guy story. The Araucanos largely sided with the royalists. This text says it plain as day. They remained constantly faithful to the king's cause. It was a classic case of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. They saw the distant king as maybe, just maybe, a check on the power of their immediate, lifelong oppressors, the Chilean Criollos.
Okay, so we've got patriots fighting royalists, we've got patriots fighting other patriots, and we have the Araucanos fighting the patriots. It is absolute chaos. But now, let's zoom out for a second, because Chile's internal brawl was also a critical piece in a much larger, continent-wide game of chess. And this is where the grand strategic vision of General José de San Martín comes in. He was the great liberator of Argentina, and he understood something absolutely vital. As long as the Spanish held their ultimate stronghold in Lima, Peru, no nation in South America could ever truly be free. To win the war for good, you had to take Lima.
And that thinking gave birth to his masterpiece of strategy, the Continental Plan. And this plan was audacious to say the least. Step 1, build an army in Argentina. Step 2, do the impossible and cross the Andes Mountains to help liberate Chile. And then, Step 3, use a free Chile as a platform, a naval base, to launch the final amphibious assault on Lima. Chile's chaotic war wasn't just a local squabble. The fate of an entire continent hung in the balance.
And that really brings us to the final, central question here. The independence of Chile wasn't just about Chile. It was the key that could unlock the liberation of all of South America. But when you look at this deeply fractured society, torn apart by personal ambition, by class conflict, by centuries of ethnic strife, you have to wonder. The real challenge wasn't just winning the war. It was whether a stable, unified nation could ever truly be built from the ashes of all that chaos.